You guys are mean.
I think we are
Mean,
now live.
Meenakshi. She's mean.
Anyone that's joining missed the hijinks between Negda and Meenakshi.
Negda.
We're,
You know
we're
what?
making silly jokes right now.
Are we though? Or are we just being mean to me? I thought I had enough of that from my sister, but not from my virtual sisters.
So you're actually live and recording.
Yeah, we are live and recording. So anybody that is joining right now, please say hello in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear where you're coming from. I'm right now in Vancouver, Canada. Behind me is my dog, Charlie. She's thinks this is too early. And Meenakshi, you're in Ashburn, Virginia right now? Yes. And Magda's on...
I'm in the naughty corner.
Okay.
That's where I am. That's per usual.
We already had to mute her, so we'll see how this goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's wait for people to trickle in, first of all. Second of all, I just want to say that you guys are all we're recording, as if there's a problem. What you have to remember is that this is not getting any better. So by agreeing to have me in this webinar, you have agreed to the terms and conditions of this contract.
I don't remember signing anything.
Yeah, good point. You probably didn't. Damn it. Also, isn't this session about inclusiveness? So you have to include people who are stranger than thou.
True.
Meenakshi.
Have you found anyone in that category yet?
You mean, wow.
I love you. I'm sorry. This is what happens. It's two early days in a row. We had a meeting yesterday at 6 a.m. my time.
I'm gonna send this to my sister, and she's going to pee herself laughing because this is exactly how she talks to me. She's like, Magda, go. I don't want to see you. Corner. You guys. All right, I will be useful. I'm going to post this on LinkedIn because this was a last minute addition. So people may not be totally aware of this. So if I figure out how to make a copy and paste, I will do that.
And if many people are like me, they're going to be coming in around 4 or 5 minutes into the webinar when they remember it's going on because they get a little notification on their phone.
Oh.
But as anyone comes in, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. Just say where you are, what you like to sing in the shower, any of those things.
Sorry, are you saying I should start singing? Because that's what I'm hearing.
I already offered Meenakshi, and she said no. Or she didn't actually. She was considering it, and then I advised her to say no. But I can. I do a mean rendition of These Boots Are Made for Walking. And I actually do like a runway walk. Yeah.
Nice.
So
now that I know this, you know what's gonna have to happen at some point.
Yeah. Maybe we can do
you keep digging your holes, man. I know way too much now. Yeah. So, sighing usually helps.
I have to turn off my I installed an extension that reminds me to take a breath every 15 minutes, but I don't know how to actually mute it. So if you hear bells gonging all of a sudden, we'll just all take a breath collectively. But I'll try to mute myself before that happens. So, all right, we are on. We are just getting started now. So thank you, everyone that's here. Welcome to Awake, Aware, and Arise. Thanks for joining us. Sorry, Charlie is sneezing.
Oh, I was gonna ask who is sneezing. Bless you, Charlie.
That's my dog. She chooses the best times to speak up. Yeah, so we're really happy that you're here joining us to challenge our thinking, talk about ways that we can show up and, you know, kind of fight to save not so much the world, but ourselves within the world and make it a better place. Yeah, really happy to see you here. Please put your name in chat. And I'm about to turn this over to Meenakshi. Meenakshi is a solopreneur. She is the founder of NorthStar Solutions and Services, which is a professional coaching and consulting firm. And we're going to be talking about inclusive design and the future of work. And over to you, Meenakshi.
Thank you. Thank you both. And thank you, Coach Arya, for having me today. So my name is Meenakshi Iyer. I'm speaking to you from Ashburn, Virginia in the US. So I'm on East Coast time and it is 12 noon my time today. And I've been part of the Coach Arya community for about a year now. This also kind of coincided, me finding Coach Arya coincided with me also taking a break from corporate life as of last year. So in terms of, by way of introduction, I'm a project management process improvement professional with multidisciplinary experience in different industries such as healthcare and IT and health IT. And I've lived in India and in the US and in more than 10 different cities. And I speak 4 languages, including English. So it's been an interesting experience. And one of the reasons I chose to talk about this topic, inclusive design and the future of work, is primarily to look at, to bring my interdisciplinary view into the world of work. So if I may, to set us off, if I could have people respond in the chat window, what you think, what comes to mind when you think about the future of work? Looking in the chat window. Okay. So what's happening now? That's flexibility. Okay. All right. Okay. AI, yes. Okay. And what being open to change? Great. All right. Thank you for that. Virtual offices may open up, hiring more. Yeah. So I'm seeing a lot around flexibility, virtual work, the use of technology, and things like that. So all of that, absolutely. So I wanted us to take the time to kind of unpack this a little bit. So there's 3 main things that I want to focus on in today's session. One is to, what happens to how the way of working, what happens to how we have always worked and how that's going to change. It's already changing. Then the second piece is around the future of work itself. What are the different elements? And then, of course, talking about the third element is how can we look at the principles of inclusive design and how might we adopt those into our ways of working. So I'm sure all of us will agree with this, right? And this is more and more true more and more now, even if we're not able to travel, or even if your teams are not really multinational teams, but you're definitely multicultural, because there's so much of movement of people due to effects of globalization that it's not uncommon to find people from different cultural groups, even in your own co-located teams within your own geographies. And what's really emerged for me, excuse me, in my more than 2 decades of experience is that regardless of whether we are at work or otherwise, we are essentially social groups. And so we tend to bring our whole selves to work. Now, whether we care to admit it or not, or realize it or not, is a whole nother question altogether. So this is my first submission, that we are essentially social groups. And please keep your responses and comments coming in the chat window. And when we talk about the future of work, and it's reflected in some of the responses that some of you shared earlier in the chat, a few elements, of course, and that what I wanted to focus on for today is, one is the use of technology and the human-computer interaction, the field of HCI. Two, some of the skills, human skills that are kind of coming back, things that were, I think, in the industrial world set aside, they're coming back. So there is more focus on, and then if you look at the Future of Jobs report that's published by the World Economic Forum, you'll start seeing that skills such as critical thinking, leadership with a coaching mindset, these are elements that are coming up, that are bubbling up to the top, and they're in the top 10 skills for the workforce. The third element is that we're also moving away to a large extent, and this is definitely true in the knowledge work economy, where work gets done more with collaboration as opposed to your traditional top-down hierarchical systems of management or leadership, if you will. So, and add to this element of either remote working or geographically distributed teams, how do you get work done? And the primary skill that comes to, that's useful here is the ability to collaborate, regardless of your individual identity. So regardless of age, regardless of location, the national culture and things like that. And the fourth element is, what does change look like? So yes, you know, change is the only constant. It's a cliche. We've all heard that. But then I think in the current context, we are really, really experiencing that, where change is really happening at a very high pace. And so what does that look like in the context of the future of work? Moving on, the third element that I talked about in my introduction around inclusive design. So we're going to spend some time looking at what are some of the key principles of inclusive design. But these are some images that I wanted to share, and I'd love to get your feedback on what comes to mind when you see, for example, when you see this image with the 4 birds. What's coming to mind? If you can put that in the chat window. Differences, separation, uniqueness. Yeah, that's an interesting one, looking in different directions. Disagreement. Yeah. Or I would say all of that is true. Something that popped up for me is, how might we think about who the world is designed for? Is it designed for the majority or the minority? And what makes it majority and what makes a particular group a minority? That's what struck me. And I think for me, in the context of what's happening in the US right now, the element of race stood out for me. I noticed the color. That's the first thing I noticed in that image. So if you look at the second one, the one where it says a blind customer couldn't use the Winn-Dixie's website, he sued, changes are coming. What's that bringing up for you? a blind customer couldn't use a website. They sued and there was a settlement. What's coming up for you? Okay. And similarly, then the third one where it says gender, please check. What's that bringing up? Yeah. Yeah. So I'm seeing some responses here, absolutely, and those were some of the things that popped up for me. So until about, I want to say about 12 months ago, the box that says gender, male, female, it wouldn't have stood out for me. But the more work and research that I've been doing in the space of intersectionality and identities, I've begun to realize, and also looking at, okay, who is the world really designed for? Is it the majority or for the minority? And then around a physical limitation or a disability, how that affects the way you experience the world. So a blind customer using a website. 20 years ago, I would have said, why does a blind person need to use a computer? And that's how irreverent and disrespectful I was in my thinking. But one of the things, and this is a very topical example, is around what's happening with the current pandemic. The whole idea of physical distancing, again, it works well for able-bodied people because you're still able to do and take care of yourself and do everything that you need to take care of yourself on your own. People that rely on other people and physical contact with other people for living their daily lives. So who are those people? Senior citizens in care homes around the world. Senior citizens who have to now just stay isolated in their own rooms and who cannot even step out. People that have other mobility challenges. People that are hearing impaired, because now everybody wears a mask, so you can't lip read, and your whole expression is very limited. Folks that have to work remotely, so that worked differently for different people. People with mobility challenges, everybody working from home, level the playing field. Whereas people that have challenges around sight or hearing, it made their world very, very hard, so much harder than it already was for them. Just yesterday, I read a news article where the writer was talking about how their own parent broke down because they were not able to, they were in isolation because of their age. And the only medium of communication was technology. And because they were because they were vision impaired, they couldn't use the computer appropriately because the computer was not able to pick up and do screen reading for them because of the kind of images and how the fact that whatever was on the screen was not ADA compliant and the American Disabilities Act compliant, in the sense that it didn't have a transcription and audio transcription and things like that. So it made me think about all these things. So when we design, this is where for me the elements of inclusive design really comes into play. I'm going to pause here and have another question. What's coming up for you based on everything that you've heard so far? When was the last time you thought about someone that was differently abled from you? Yeah, a lot of times, a lot of us don't, because we don't know of that many. A lot of us don't have folks within our social circles or work circles that have um, any specific challenges. And, you know, it's out of sight, out of mind. That's what I've seen. So this, what I'm trying to do right now is really force us to think about things that we wouldn't normally do. And in the human-centered design thinking process, it's referred to as flaring. So we're trying to do some divergent thinking, and then we'll finally bring it all in and come back to focus. So we are right now in the flare phase. So coming back to the first point that I made about us bringing our whole selves to work. So we looked at 3 elements, right? How do teams function? What do we do in our workspaces? What does the future of work look like? And what is inclusive design? And then my attempt today in the next 80 odd minutes is to tie them all together and to make my case that there is a lot that we can learn from the principles of inclusive design that we can adopt in our ways of working, in making our ways of working future-proof, and making our ways of working compatible to what the future of work is going to demand of us. And by the way, the future of work is already here. The concept per se it's the 4th industrial revolution. The concept has existed for more than a decade almost, and the World Economic Forum called it out, I want to say about 5 or 6 years ago. And we're experiencing it in a hurry, if you will, because of everything that's happening. It's just compounded and magnified by the ongoing pandemic. So in terms of bringing our whole selves to work, here what I'm sharing is most of the work that the late Dutch social psychologist Gert Hofstadter has put in, all of his research on how national identities and our cultural experiences, how they play a role in who we are and how we show up at work and in our lives in general. So I've taken a lot of that, and I'll introduce you to the tool as well. There's a culture comparison tool that we can take advantage of, especially those of us that work in multicultural teams. So the first element that really plays a huge role is our national cultures. And then that talks about how power distance looks like, what our understanding of gender norms and stereotypes are, and that's really based on where we come from and how we were raised. What our native language is it English or is it not English, especially in the context of the world of work? And how do we view time? Is it sequential, or is it depending on what's happening around us at that point in time that takes precedence? So is it monochronic or polychronic? So really taking a quick look at each of these elements. So in terms of, national cultures, a couple of things that really I wanted to focus on here is that some cultures are collectivist cultures. So if you look at South America, South Asia, large parts of Africa, to some extent Eastern Europe, North Africa, these regions, the society is collectivist, where people think about their concept of self revolves around their relationship with people around them. So I'm South Asian, I'm from India. When I think about myself, my identity, a lot of things that pop up first in my head are how I'm related. So I am a wife, a daughter, a sister. So my identity, large parts of it are formed by the relationships that I have. On the other end of the spectrum are cultures that are individualistic, and large parts of North America, Western Europe will fall in that category. And this is the belief system is that the individual, there's a lot of self-reliance, and it's about the individual, and decisions are made based on what's good for me as an individual. So when I first moved to the United States more than 12 years ago, that was a big shift for me in terms of how I thought about things and the decisions I made in my career and my personal life. And it was a bit of a, but I will say this, that since I didn't grow up as part of a large joint family in India, we were just, my parents and my sibling, the experience was much different from a lot of my other friends and family from India who grew up in large families. So that made a difference to me, and that kind of helped make this shift to an individualistic thought process a little bit easier, I would say. So that's on the national cultures. Those are the two things that I wanted to call out. Whether we are collectivists, whether we originally come from a collectivist or an individualistic culture, and what is our sense of self around that. Power distance. This plays out a lot in the world of work, positional power, and then how it intersects with gender. And that's another thing that we're going to look at. What happens when in a team situation, how easy or difficult it is for team members to share concerns. So let's say it's a project and it's right now, it's being delayed. There's a huge risk. There's going to be someone is going to go off on leave. You're going to be short-staffed. There are all these risks. How comfortable does the team feel in highlighting these risks? So the way I've seen this played out is that the day before, let's say a product or an implementation is going to go live, the day before is when we'll find out that, well, you know what, we can't deliver this to the client because there were so many other things that are not yet done, or something, a major catastrophe took place with, in the project. And the reason why, so this to me has always been a clear indication of a lack of psychological safety within the team. And there is this tells me that people don't feel safe, or they have a fear of retribution if they wanted to call out certain risks much in advance. So this plays out in multicultural teams where, let's say, and especially, so I've most of my career I spent in the information technology, in the IT, software development, product development world, where there's a lot of outsourcing of work that's done. So the clients end up being from individualistic cultures, so the Western world, and people that are doing the work and delivering end up coming from parts of the world where it's traditionally a collectivist culture, where the power distance is very high in terms of from a hierarchical perspective. So the systems are very hierarchical, the leadership, the teams are very hierarchical, the structure is very hierarchical, and there's a lot of respect for authority. And that respect sometimes spills over into fear of retribution. Now, these types of teams, your structure is going to be a bit like a pyramid, whereas in a collaborative team, it's a bit like a hub and spoke. So sharing of power, what power means, how it's displayed and experienced by the team is different. Now, there's also this concept of obedience in exchange for care. And this is very high, this concept, you see this in effect in a lot of collectivist cultures where the leader sits at the top of the pyramid, will at any point in time always is supposed to make decisions that that take care of the team. So there is that sort of a feudal system, if you will. So there is obedience and in exchange for care. And that plays out as well. So it's the structure and also the sense of how power is experienced. I'm going to pause here. I saw a couple of things pop up in the chat window. Yeah, that's true. And I've met a couple of professionals from Nigeria, women in agile, women in tech, and both of them, and I know that 2 is not a big sample size, but both of them, when they introduce themselves, they actually also introduce themselves as mothers, which is very interesting. I've never heard that I'd never heard that before. Even in India, I'd never heard that. So in a work context, I mean. So this was a professional presentation, and as part of their introduction, they both introduced themselves as mothers, which is very interesting. So I see some of that in what Tracy has shared here as well. Yeah. Okay. So moving on, the next element that I wanted to look at in terms of bringing our whole selves to work is gender norms and stereotypes. So they end up, what we see more often being done ends up becoming a rule. So women are supposed to stay home, take care of the household and their kids. This is what we've seen happen, and somehow that's accepted and that becomes a norm. Now, if you look back and to World War II, with all the men at the front lines, it was the women who were members of the workforce. So they were no longer confined to their households, but they actually went out and worked because that was the only way out to survive. We are seeing a lot of the and what we saw at that time was, once the war ended, and this is definitely true for the Western part of the world, when the war ended, a lot of those changes kind of rolled back, and it went back to those old stereotypical systems where women went back to being caretakers of the home. And in the current pandemic situation, we are seeing a lot of that coming back. At least in the US, there was a report, the jobs report, the latest jobs report that came out. It indicates the number of women that have been forced to leave the workforce because of increased responsibilities at home, with everyone working from home, with school being online. So the balancing childcare, elder care, care for the home, there's no time for self-care. So they had to make some choices. So the losses in terms of women having to leave the workforce amounts to undoing 5 years worth of progress. So it remains to be seen what the future of work will look like, given the current trade-offs that women in the workforce are being forced to make. So even pre-COVID, the way I've seen some of these stereotypes play out in teams, especially if you're talking about a collaborative team and that follows an agile way of working, where the teams are supposed to be self-organizing and collaborative and cross-skilled, how different genders interact with one another. And if you look at it, I'm really building the scaffolding here. We started with national culture. We looked at power distance. Each of these really will build out your complete intersection, if you will. So if you are, if you're from the Western part of the world, if you're male, then your gender, and then you layer the gender stereotype on top of that. Compare that with a woman from South India, like myself, or South Asia, and then you top the expectation around power, how I'm supposed to, as a South Asian woman, how I'm supposed to react and respond to power. So each of these is, they play out, and the more layers you add, the individuals with the most number of these layers that affect them in terms of intersections of identity, the more oppressed or disadvantaged they are. That's what research shows that, and that's what happens on the ground, and I've experienced a lot of that myself. This is a very, very important aspect, particularly in the world of work, where English is the lingua franca, but given the popularity of English as a language, you might think that, how many people do you think speak English? Let me ask you that. Just guess. No right or wrong answers. We are almost 7.5 billion people in the world. And given the popularity of English, how many people do you think speak English as their first language? Yeah, I don't remember the math, so, but it's something like 400 to 500 million people. That's how many people speak English as their first language. And I speak English as my second language, and I've also been an ESL teacher in my past life, English as a second language teacher. And I did that. I did ESL teaching in India, which, as most of us would know, it was colonized, right? So we spent more than 200 years under British rule. And I find now I realize that our minds are still colonized. So decolonizing your mind and your behavior pattern, that's a whole nother exercise. And it's a lot of hard work. In fact, just as we were getting ready for this session, I was sharing this with Tracy and Magda, that the way I was raised, the choices that my parents had to make was that in their minds and in their experience, knowing English and the ability to speak English, read, write, and speak English was the passport to a good job, whatever good meant for them. And the other thing was, India is a country where every state has its own language with its own script and grammar and everything. So if you cross state lines, very often you wouldn't be able to read the street signs, which is true for me. And I've lived in different parts of the country. And English somehow ended up serving as our link language, thanks to the 200 plus years of the British colonization. So English really helped me, move. It didn't matter where I lived in India, as long as I was able to speak English and one other Indian language, I was able to get by. But the point is, we changed how I lived the first 20 years of my professional life. The focus on the ability to converse in English has always been number one. It's always been there, high. And that somehow made a lot of us, and this is true for a lot of us even now in India, and I saw a lot of this when I was an ESL teacher, that the ability to speak English is aspirational. So people come there it's a coveted skill, and people would spend money, they would take out loans in order to be able to afford. I worked for an international language learning school, and our courses were expensive, but people took out loans in order to be able to afford that, because getting that skill of being able to speak English was rated that high that it was worth it for them to do that, to spend that kind of money. What happens in the workplace? How does someone's ability to speak English, how does that affect their career prospects? This is something I've studied at work. And I've seen that, again, if you look at all of the other intersections of the identity, this piles on that. And this is true in the US. So when I first moved here, it took me more than 2 years to find a job. And there was no regard whatsoever for my previous experience from India. A lot of people could not pronounce my name. And so the assumptions that are made around my English speaking ability are all based on my resume. And if I ever added a photograph, it probably just made it worse. It introduced more bias because I'm a person of color. So I in fact used to joke, I should probably change my first name to Michelle. I'd have a better luck at somebody calling me. So that's the experience that I've had, and it's not just mine. It's not, I mean, this is true of a lot of adults who speak English as a second language. But the fact that you speak another language has it adds a whole level of layer of depth to us as individuals. And there is enough research that proves that the benefits of being multilingual. So there's that. And so this plays out in the workplace whether or not you're considered for promotions, whether or not you're considered for roles that are in a different geography. How do people respect you as a leader? what happens if you are someone who's female, who's a person of color, and speak English as a second language? What is your experience like vis-a-vis a man who's also an English as a second language speaker? So these are some considerations. This is a big one. I mentioned a few terms earlier on, polychronic and monochronic. So again, there are similarities, parallels between cultures. So most individualistic cultures also have a sequential approach to time. So they're monochronic, which means that you can make appointments with your hairstylist 6 months in advance and no need for reminders from either end. You show up and the hairstylist is there. You can, so that's a monochronic culture where things are, it's a rules-based society. So you made an agreement, there's a contract, so you keep up with the contract. And then there are cultures, so my home country culture from India, we are a very relationship-based society. So the way we view time is polychronic, which means it's a high context. Whatever is happening around me at that point in time, even if I'd made an appointment 6 months ago, but right now, if my boss called me and asked me for a certain report to be done within the next 30 minutes, that becomes my top priority. And every other appointment that I had agreed to prior to that gets pushed to the side. And so the way I view time is based on my local context. And it's because it's a relationship based and relationship oriented culture that I'm a part of. This one particular issue causes so much friction, particularly in the outsourcing world, because people doing the work are, they, like I pointed out earlier, come from parts of the world that are collectivist cultures, relationship-based societies, et cetera, et cetera. So context is very high. You have a very top-down approach in terms of your power structure. And then your clients, people who are getting the work done, they come from individualistic societies that are rules-based and that have a very different view of time and also power. So this really, becomes the clash. It becomes the us versus them. So even companies that have teams in different parts of the world doing different things for their end customer, it's very hard to bring these teams together because there's a lot of us versus them that happens, and it's very detrimental to overall well-being of the employees. And there's also this a colonial mindset that sets in. Add to that the English language abilities as well. So you'll see that all of these things intersect and overlap in sometimes really detrimental ways. And that's where self-awareness makes a big difference. So I'm going to pause for any thoughts or questions before we move on to the next segment. And yes, I see your notes here, your comments here, Tracy. Yep. Yeah, it is sad. And it's really coming to the forefront, particularly during the pandemic, at least in the US, where we had a lot of legal immigrants with qualifications, qualified doctors and physicians and nurses, that just because they were not certified or licensed to work in the US couldn't be part of the essential worker healthcare workforce. And then a lot of work had to be done to get them in. Thank you for that, Magda. All right, so just a quick summary, a recap. So this is what we talked about just now in terms of our teams. So this is, we bring our whole selves to work. And these are the elements that we looked at, yeah? And I'm doing a quick time check here. All right. So, okay, so what? We've talked about all this. Well, because we bring our whole selves to work, which means we work with our heads and hearts and hands, and also our implicit biases. And all of this has an impact on workplace behavior. And I'm going to quickly run through some elements that I've seen, and I've actually alluded to some of those in my examples earlier as well. So communication, of course, is a big deal, not just from a language perspective. It's all about how to communicate, when to communicate, what is the tone, what is your nonverbal stance, even when you have video calls. What happens when you have a mixed gender team? Does everyone get an equal opportunity to speak during meetings, for instance? What is the quality of facilitation? There are so many aspects to think about. What happens to the quality of teamwork? And I do make a distinction between teamwork and collaboration. So the way I look at it is teamwork is the quality of collaboration within the team, whereas collaboration is across different teams or different business units, depending on what the ecosystem is. And I just alluded to this earlier around planning and scheduling. And this is a big headache in the project management space, particularly at least what I've experienced in the IT space. Not being able to stick to deadlines, and then that really puts everyone in the blame game space, and then there is no end to it. It all goes downhill from there. Calling out risks, this again, we talked about it when we talked about, especially in the context of power structures. The same goes for ideas. When you want to innovate, not only do you need cognitive diversity, you also need a safe space for people to come out with ideas and not be fearful of being laughed at or being put down. Because an idea is an idea, and an idea is only as good as its execution. So just because someone came up with an idea doesn't mean they have to be blamed or adored for it, right, with the idea, right? The last element that I've seen, feedback, that whole feedback cycle. How comfortable are people sharing feedback? How is feedback given? How is feedback received? How close to the event is feedback received and shared? All of these elements, everything goes back to the 6 elements we talked about earlier: national identity, your power structure, your gender role expectations, your language abilities, your time perception, all of that. So all of those elements, the way they intersect and overlap, this is the impact, and there's so much at stake. And this is why I'm making the case that adopting principles of inclusive design is, in my opinion, in my experience, one of the most effective ways of making our ways of working future-proof. So, into the next phase of our next segment. So what is inclusive design? I'm going to stop sharing for a quick second. So what I do want to capture it as a word cloud. So give me 1 second. So the question is, I put a link here. If you wouldn't mind clicking on that and sharing your thoughts on what does inclusion mean to you? What does inclusion mean to you? If you can put your responses in that. Okay. Inviting, welcoming stakeholders, fantastic. Everyone, common. Open-mindedness, okay. What else? So I see 4 responses. Empathy, unbiased. Okay. Keep the responses coming in because the poll is still open. Now, I'm going to stop sharing. There's one more question there. I'm just going to bring it up. So my next question to you is, so stay on the same link. The next question that should come up for you is, how do you currently practice inclusion? How do you currently practice inclusion? I'll put the link once more. A phrase, a word, yeah. How do you practice inclusion? Questions, test. Okay, being open-minded, understanding others, finding commonalities, yeah, open to all, open-minded. So some of the same themes are coming back up. Respecting everyone, intention, love, embracing others. Cool, thank you. And keep them coming because we'll look back at it in a minute. Probe beyond political correctness. Couldn't agree with you more. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. Give me 1 second. Okay. So what I want to do next is look into what is inclusive design from a definition perspective, look at the 7 core principles of inclusive design, and then we'll conclude with how does that tie back to the future of work, yeah? So this is a fairly dated definition, you might say. It's 15 years old. And I'm going to read it out and then let this be on the screen for a minute. So this is the British Standards Institute's definition. The design of mainstream products and or services that are accessible to and usable by as many people as reasonably possible without the need for special adaptation or specialized design. It's a mouthful. You'll notice that I've highlighted certain words and phrases in blue text. And I would, for the purposes of today's session, I'd like us to focus on those, on the words and phrases in blue text. And if you wouldn't mind sharing in the chat window if any of those resonate with you, and which of those items in blue text resonates with you, which is accessible to, usable by, without the need for special adaptation. Out of those 3, which of them, if at all, resonates with you the most? If you can just indicate that in the chat window. You can say 1, 2, or 3. So you can just type 1, 2, or 3. For some reason, I'm not able to see the chat. Okay. Okay, that's fine. So accessible, and let me share my screen again. Accessible, so some say usable, without the need for special adaptation. Okay, thank you. All right, so I want to give a quick example here. So as a solopreneur that's focused on professional coaching, training, and consulting, and I'm a virtual business, so I don't have a shop front. I do all my work using technology, using the internet. And one of my core values, personal values, and for my business is inclusion. Yes, Tracy, the user shouldn't need to adapt to make the system work. That is correct. And I have some examples. I'll just show you that in a minute. So for me, it is important to reach as many people as possible from a coaching perspective. And one of the things, a few of the things that I've learned recently is the importance of subtitles, the importance of if I'm putting out video content, how accessible is it for people across different levels of abilities, physical, functional abilities. So if they're visually challenged, if their hearing is limited, how does my content interact with people with different abilities? So that's something I've started thinking more and more about. So I just want to give you that as an example. So that is that's where the accessibility is. So when you put out images on social media, there's something called help text or alt text, and that's what screen readers, those systems that read out things for you, that's what they pick up. When you use hashtags, if you have multiple words in a hashtag, making sure that you capitalize the first letter of every new word is important, because that's what helps the screen readers pick up as two separate words. Otherwise, it's very difficult for screen readers, automated screen readers, to read those out to people that are using them. So these are very simple things, but it's, to me, there's a lot of similarities to this with coaching. It's all about presence. It's all about empathy and moving forward, right? So how are you helping your client to move forward? Similarly, how are you helping your potential, be it customers or your stakeholders, whoever you're interacting with, how are you creating whatever you're creating that's of value, and there is no need for special adaptation, right? So that was an example. These are the 7, moving on, these are the 7 principles of inclusive design. And I've mentioned the source here, and we'll make this deck available to you as well. And if you look at it, it's all centered in the concept of human-centered design. So it starts with saying, provide comparable experience. So my abilities should not decide the level of value that I'm supposed to get out of an experience. So my experience has to be comparable regardless of my physical and or other abilities. What is my current situation and I'm talking about this as a stakeholder, as a receiver of a service in this context. Being consistent. So if I'm used to seeing, if Magda is used to seeing my content appear on LinkedIn every morning at 9 a.m. Central Time, it's important that I be consistent with that. And if I'm not going to miss a day, find a way to communicate that with my stakeholder, in this case, Magda. And what is the control that you're giving to your stakeholders? An example, in current days world where everybody is on video calls all the time, give people control, and the next principle, offer them the choice of turning on their video, yes or no, it's their choice. And they have the control to choose, because not everybody has a home office, can afford a home office. And that goes back to my first point, that my ability should not get in the way of my experience, as long as I'm doing everything else that it takes to do that work or that task properly. If you're really being inclusive, then prioritize content in a way that it works for everyone. Again, designing for the extremes, not just the mainstream. So if you remember that image with the 3 black birds and the 1 white bird, design that for everyone, right? Not just the 3 black birds just because they were looking in one direction, and not for the white bird because the bird was looking in another direction. Prioritize the content for everyone. And make sure you're adding value. Why are you doing what you're doing? and being clear about that. So wanted to actually just take a minute and show some examples. We'll share my screen again. And this is available to you. This is public content. And it goes into each principle and the way to implement each of these principles, how to achieve it. And this is from a product perspective. And that is my goal, to bring that interdisciplinary sense into how we work, right? So thinking about something, so we are kind of, down the funnel of flare to focus. So please go through this in your own time. I'll share the link of this with the presentation. So it actually talks about each of these principles and how to make it work in a digital product perspective. Yeah. Any questions or thoughts so far? Okay. Okay. So now there is another view of these 7 principles. Let me show you that. And it kind of roughly translates into these 7 characteristics of a product or a service, and then by extension, in the context of our talk today, to the world of work and the future of work. So asking these questions, so from a coaching perspective, if you're able to convert these 2 questions, think about them as open-ended questions. How can you make this product useful and marketable to people with a range of abilities? So therein lies the equity element of it. Is it flexible? Is it intuitive? Do people automatically know where to go once they open a screen, for example? Does it achieve its purpose? Is it effective? How does it cope with errors? How many times have we tried to fill out a form online and you miss one required field and everything that you typed is gone and you have to do it all over again? So how tolerant is the system of human errors? And what is the efficiency, right? Does it stress or tire the user? There are some online applications that I look at the length of the application and I said, oh my goodness, I mean, this is like 25,000 fields that I have to fill out. I probably am not going to do this. So how often is your system a barrier as opposed to be an aid? Thinking about it in that perspective. So think about it in terms of how you set up your human processes around your teams at work. Are you enabling them or giving them an excuse to not do something because of the processes and the social contracts that you have in place? And is it appropriate? Is the method of communication, for instance, in a team, is that appropriate for that particular type of situation? So this is just a different perspective on the same 7 principles. Okay. So what does inclusive design look like in the workplace? So now we're kind of trying to connect the 3 dots. We looked at teams, we looked at what is inclusive design, and now we're looking at how to tie these to what can we bring from the world of tangible, hard product design or even digital product design from that space to how we operate in the workplace as teams. So what are some of the benefits? Why am I making this case for inclusive design at the workplace? So some of the benefits are that it definitely goes towards trust, and this is also true between a coach and a client. The foundational element is trust, and there is a lot of both parties need to be vulnerable in the sense acknowledging of their true emotions. That's how I define vulnerability. It's not about having a sob fest. It is about bearing your emotions as and when you feel them, that's appropriate to that particular interaction. That leads to building of collaboration. So anyone that's interested, or if you've already heard of Patrick Lencioni and his book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, it's a must read. It's like a corporate fable, easy to read, but at the same time, a lot of depth. And he builds that pyramid of the 5 dysfunctions, and the base is trust. The other thing that we touched upon earlier is diversity of thought. You need to get different perspectives if you're trying to innovate, if you're trying to solve a problem, because your solution needs to work for everyone, and which means you need to be able to capture inputs from everyone, all of your stakeholders. And then when you adopt these principles of inclusive design, they automatically, in my experience, make you intentional in thinking about how you work collaboratively as a team. You start thinking about, oh, half my team is in the Eastern time zone and 3 people are in Germany, 4 are in India, finding a time that works for everyone. You really become intentional about it, about accommodating everyone. Remember, we talked about you design something that doesn't require a lot of special adaptation. So that some of those principles really help you become intentional about how you design your human processes for your teams. And that's how there's co-creation, and that's one of the most, that's like the bedrock principle of human-centered design is co-creation. So there's buy-in from everyone because everybody was involved in building that, whatever it may be, right? All right, so that's, okay, I'm gonna take a quick look at the chat. Thanks, Tracy. All right, so how do we operationalize it? What are some ways in which inclusive design can be in action? So some of you responded earlier. I asked that question, how do you currently practice inclusion? And there was a lot of mention of understanding. Some said observe, ask, be respectful, all of that. So what I have to share is not too different from what all of you shared already. So going back to those 3 keywords, right? Looking at accessibility. When you talk about teams, and when you talk about teams in the getting work done, and of course, my context is knowledge work mostly, or any work that can be done using technology, right? That includes healthcare, that includes coaching, that includes training. So it's not just we are past that phase where a lot of things that were deemed impossible, the scenarios created by the current pandemic have changed a lot of that. So when you look at accessibility, what does that look like in the world of work? That everybody is able to collaborate regardless of their physical location, and regardless of the other layers in the scaffolding that we talked about, power structure, hierarchy, gender. So if there are certain gender-based norms and stereotypes, for example, that translate into behavior, how do we sort of overcome that in order to continue to collaborate, as an example? If you have different concepts around time, how do you make it work? How do you be in that space of respectful curiosity to understand where the other person is coming from and then accommodate accordingly? We talked about usability. So I'm picking on those 3 pieces that I put in blue text earlier in the BSI definition, the British Standards Institute definition. So looking at usability, so with the processes, the social contracts that you set up as to work as a team, what are your rules of engagement? How feasible and usable is it? So just because you said everybody, somehow someone said, okay, we're gonna have a 9 a.m. Eastern time meeting every morning, is that rule really usable for the whole team? If you have half your team, only half your team in the US on that time zone and the others are spread around the world, how usable is that? And this ties back to without the need for special adaptation. So we've already touched upon that. So these are different ways in which you can think about how you can operationalize some of these principles of inclusive design into your world of work. I also wanted to touch upon some examples of inclusive behaviors. At the end of the day, your concepts need to be translated into actions through your behaviors, right? So you have your concept, behavior leads to action. Going back to knowing people as people first, and what that means, what is your whole entire identity? Not from okay, I really have to caution everyone here, because I've been guilty of this. Your confirmation bias kicks in just because you think somebody looks like they are from some place. You have already formed a few opinions and biased opinions, and you have those questions coming from a place of, I just want to confirm if that's true. So that's your confirmation bias is at your all-time high. So this curiosity has to come from a place of being open-minded, being respectful, and the intent is to understand and learn. So you have that beginner's mindset or a child's mindset, if you will. The next one is around when you have those rules of engagement conversations. So for example, do you want to have a team check-in meeting twice a day? When you have the opportunity to respond to that question, being authentic about it and being honest about it. How do you want to check in? How do you want to provide status updates? How do you want to ask for help? What are your rules of engagement around that? And being true, honest, and authentic during those conversations. And the next one, this I would say is, although as much as we kind of all of us are zoomed out, a lot of fatigue around video meetings, setting up that unstructured time. So if you set up a pattern where you meet with others in your team only when there's something to be done, then it's a very task-oriented behavior. If you've got to tie it back to getting to know people as people first, setting up those unstructured conversations, setting up time for that, and definitely trying to have those using your video is a good call, especially if you are if you're working in a geographically distributed team. And it is still possible to pick up on nonverbal cues even if you can't see the other person. There is voice, there is change in tone, inflection, hesitation to speak. These are all nonverbal cues that tells you something about the other person, what they're experiencing. How present are we is the question, to capture all of that. So, and this applies in coaching as well, especially with virtual coaching. You don't have to be on a video call to understand what the client is experiencing, to be present and to notice, share, and ask. There's enough that we communicate with our whole bodies anyway. So we are able to pick up, and we can. It's all about how present we are in that conversation. And to me, this is like the rinse and repeat, being intentional and disciplined and consistent about practicing all of these behaviors. To me, that's what kind of ties it in a bow, if you will. Okay, I'm going to pause here. What's coming up for everyone? If you want to put that in the chat window. What do you agree with? What do you not agree with? Okay. Well, you're free to choose, so you don't have to answer. But if you do have something to share, that would be great. Okay, so thanks, Tracy. I do have a question for everyone. And I'm putting it in it's another link. And the question is, what's the one thing you will start or continue doing to be more inclusive? Alt text, that's a cool one. Pay attention. Be mindful. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. So now, pay attention more. Yep. Okay. So stay on the same link. And I have another question for you. And that is, what's the one thing that you will stop doing in order to be more inclusive? That first one reminds me of unconditional positive regard. Yeah, a lot of that. Now think of the next question. Yeah. So it's about listening to, whether you're listening to understand or listening to reply. Okay. I'll stop sharing. I see someone's raised a hand here. Joseph? Yes, Joseph. Did you have a question, comment?
Sorry, that is a mistake.
Oh, no worries. No worries. All right. Okay. Yes, Tracy. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna share what you said about asking people about video really struck home, because I remember reading and being quite touched by the fact that when the pandemic hit and then all of a sudden more and more people were connecting virtually, that it really sort of brought to light income disparity, and a lot of people were really embarrassed about where they were. Yep. And, you know, yep. I remember reading that and really feeling quite moved by it, but I hadn't sort of put it into my own practice to sort of check in with somebody beforehand and just say like, hey, what's your preference? Do you prefer to have video on or off? So that was a really good reminder that you shared with me. And I'm really embarrassed to say that my website, which needs a lot of things, doesn't have alt text enabled on a lot of the images. And I'm going to fix that. Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah. Of course. No, it's a big learning, you know, and only recently I've started using, this is my other big realization is technology is a great enabler, right? But it's us humans that create technology. Someone said AI in the beginning, it was Mervyn who said AI as one of the responses. And therein lies as much opportunity, there is as much cause for concern when you talk about technology. Because it's us humans that create technology, we carry our biases in the way we create technology. What does that mean? If you Google CEO for images, see what you get. What kind of people, what kind of images do you get? Just the word CEO for images. What are the top 5 images that you see? Yep.
White man.
Yep. Yep. That's one. That's an external example. When I say, Dr. Jones will see you in the next 5 minutes, what kind of identity did you associate with Dr. Jones? Please put it in the chat window. Gender, primarily gender. I'm interested in that. Dr. Jones will see you in the next 5 minutes. Ah. Woman in 40s, Southeast Asian. Yeah. Male. Yes. So a lot of times, and these kind of biases are perpetuated in our media as well. So if you carefully look at your TV shows, your movies, if there's a certain character, the role, you will have a certain culture, race, and ethnicity playing those roles consistently. So you'll have Black females playing certain roles, Black males playing certain roles, brown males playing certain roles. And that's how you build your stereotype. And the more you see something off, the more you start thinking that that's true. And it's not. Just like, you know, the way the level of popularity that English has in the business world, one might think that it's one of the most, you know, most number of people speak the language, and that's not true. So if you look at the data, your story will be different, and how you choose to interpret the data it's up to you. So going back to technology and the use of technology, there is technology that's available, but is it used in the right way? Because that's what will determine accessibility to people, right? So just because you have video conferencing available, and you're right, to your point, Tracy, the pandemic has brought up so many of the disparities and different kinds of disparities in different parts of the world. So in the US, for instance, it brought out disparities in terms of who has access to high-speed internet and who doesn't. How many kids have access to a laptop and how many don't? Even if they have access to a laptop, do they have people in their household that can handhold them during their online classes? What is their digital literacy, not only of the children, but of the household? You extend that into the world of work. Just because you work for a technology company or a knowledge work economy doesn't mean that you actually use all that technology yourself. So it's forced us to look at all these disparities, things that we didn't pay attention to in the past. People that are non-native speakers of English might find it harder to be on video calls without the video, because now they're not able to see the person, and understanding the language can be harder. So some of the good uses of technology that I've seen in the recent past, especially in the pandemic, and I'm going to do a test to show you guys, is, give me 1 second, I'm going to share my screen with the deck again. So Microsoft, for example, has done a lot of work in the inclusivity space for products. So in Microsoft now, you have, okay, I don't know why this is turned off in this. So this always use subtitles. That allows you to caption it automatically while you are sharing your screen. So let me try to do that. I can. Give me 1 second. Yeah. Let me share my screen. Hope it works. Yeah. So do you see this? Always use subtitles. And then you can set it up in what language you want. So if you do that, and then you do your slide, it'll automatically pick up, and I don't know if you can, is the subtitles showing? I can't tell.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is.
So yeah, this is one of the ways in which you make your work accessible. Your meetings are more accessible to people with different abilities. And similarly with those of us that put out video content, making sure that they are subtitled. And there's technology that allows you to do that. So, but when we build technology, who are we taking into consideration? Do we have enough cognitive diversity in building technology? I'll give you a very personal example. This happened from a few years ago. My mom lives by herself in India, and she had to take some nutritional supplement, and you get Ensure, that not a health drink, but a nutrition drink that you get. The packaging is very different in India. You don't get it in liquid form in those easy to open bottles like you get in the US. In India, you get those tin cans that have those that little metal thing that you have to rip off. Guess what? Here I am. I can only hear her because it was just a good old telephone, and I'm trying to work with her to get that open. And guess what? That little metal clamp that you're supposed to use to pull it open, it broke. So she had the thing, but she couldn't use it, and she needed it. Now that's access. When you think about packaging, if you're looking at arthritis medication, and if it is in one of those bubble wrap packages where you have to really press hard to take the pill out, really? I mean, does that even make sense? The patient has arthritis, can't get to the pill. This is how accessibility. So if you think about accessibility in these areas, and then you bring it back to something that's in your own space, which is knowledge work, I have found that looking at other industries opens your mind to possibilities within your own industry, which is why I love the interdisciplinary nature of knowledge and learning. Yep. Yes. Tylenol bottles come with this. Yes, I have to fight with the bottle to open it, and I'm fully abled, right? It still doesn't matter. So just because you have a technology or a way of doing things, does it apply to everything? And then how do you manage that? This is the constant struggle that you have in teams. When you set up your social contracts, you say that you will have status checks every morning 9 a.m. and you decided on that based on something that happened. How agile are you in revisiting those social contracts and really doing some things in a way that works for everyone, that is responsive to people's needs? Empathy is in being responsive, not in being reactive. So looking at different spaces and other industries and looking at the principles of inclusive design and what can you bring to the world of work. I'm going to pause. Questions, thoughts?
I just want to say this has been so wonderful. I'm going to watch this again.
Thank you.
Because no, really, it's just, I think of myself as being, every time I think of myself as being inclusive, I realize I have so much to learn, because you know what? I think we're especially those of us who have been born in privilege in a country where there's a major differential. Sorry, my mindfulness bells are about to go off. That's really embarrassing. But yeah, it's just every time I think I assume that I've got it, I don't. So it's going to be a constant. I think what I realize is just going to be a constant learning process for me. And think about like childproof packaging. That was a reaction to something that happened that helped one category, one category, but has made it inaccessible to so many other people. So we react and react and react, and we don't really review and reflect and reevaluate. So thank you for this.
Absolutely. I just want to leave everyone with this one image. Well, not really an image, it's a infographic. So this actually was from, this is pretty dated, it's 2003 or 2005. This is some of the research that was done by Microsoft for their accessibility on their products. So if you look at this, and this was very eye-opening for me. If you look at this, you see at the bottom of the pyramid is people with no difficulties. And this is with respect to their digital products. So it's not even, it's less than a quarter of the population, of course, the population that they surveyed, but it's less than a quarter of the population that has no difficulties. Everyone else needs some form of adaptation. So it's really flipped our thinking. If you go back to that 3 blackbirds and 1 whitebird image, we tend to think we only know what we see within our circle. And that's your echo chamber. And we believe that whatever we see within our echo chamber is all there is. So everything that's designed is designed for this less than a quarter percent, less than a quarter of the population. So if you think about in the physical world, if you think about door handles, scissors, the whole world is designed for right-handed people, more or less. Most of the world is designed for people that have no challenges around mobility or vision. So the world is designed for the sighted and for people that can hear. And it's situations like the current one, that the pandemic that we're in, that highlights the plight of the others. And when we design, because we design for what we know, we design for what we think is mainstream, which, as research shows, is not even half the population. And which is why it ties back to understanding where people come from, becoming aware of our own biases, and ensuring that we break out of our echo chambers. One last thing I'll say, as this is with regards to social media, we choose who we follow on most social media channels, right? So we have the power to choose. And it's so important that we choose wisely, because our information is defined by the people that we choose. Even on LinkedIn, right? Who we are connected with and who you follow determines the feed, the LinkedIn feed, what you see. So if we as individuals are not intentional about creating diversity in our own social circles, we are only strengthening our echo chambers, and we're going after our confirmation biases. And so it's a choice that we all have the opportunity to make as to what is the kind of future of work that we want, right? So if I may, in closing, ask everyone to put in the chat window, what's the one word that comes to mind when you think about the future of work? Interesting. Magda. Okay. So this is my closing slide. Oh, somehow it still goes back to that. Sorry. That's all I have to share. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. You mentioned having a PDF that to share. Would you be able to send that to me, and I'll put it in the LinkedIn group?
Yes,
and
yes.
For everyone here, I did post the link to the LinkedIn group on the chat. Let's keep this conversation going. I think it's a really important one, so we'd love to hear. I'm going to certainly share some of the awareness that has come to me and some of the changes that I'm going to make. I think that'll be a way for us to all be a little more intentional and also accountable, which is very important. So
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Meenakshi. And for everyone here, please continue to check out the Awake, Aware, Arise schedule. It's on the website. And have a lovely day, afternoon, evening, wherever you may be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wait, don't cancel, don't kill the chat yet. Anybody who's interested in learning more about this, please email us. You can even email me directly, magda@coacharia, because I've been on Meenakshi for a while, getting her to do some mini courses with us. And I think this one is pretty freaking interesting. I mean, I've seen her talk about this topic a few times now, and I learn something new every time. So that tells you something. And it tells you that I have a lot to learn, but also tells you that I'm paying attention differently. Anyway, maybe ignore that bit. Email us either with requests for other courses, mini courses, or to support something that Meenakshi will be doing. I think we can all benefit, and with your input, we can be inclusive in how we design the curriculum that you want.
Absolutely. Actually, that reminds me, I just do this plugin, if I may. In end of this month, I'm getting together with another international friend of mine who I've never met in person. She's based in Melbourne, Australia, Hema Kangisan, and we're actually doing an intention to action drive on unpacking intersectionality. So we're really delving into each of these topics. It's a 3-day virtual event. You can check out my website. It's very related to what we just talked about, and the details are on my website. The title is Unpacking Intersectionality. My own story is that I'm female, I'm a person of color, woman in technology, and an entrepreneur, a solopreneur. So all the odds are stacked against me, and that's something that I feel very strongly about. So yeah, do check that out.
And I think that's actually spelled wrong, but that's okay. Just go to Coacharia blog. I'm going to be on Meenakshi as well to maybe by the end of the week send me a bit of a blog about her event so we can help publicize it. And then we can double check the links in there.
Okay. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day, everyone. Cheers. Bye.